Good morning. In my opening address this morning, I'm going to deal with three issues: the consultation process leading to a new Gambling Act in Gibraltar, the issue of the Gibraltar gambling industry supporting our newly opened Centre of Excellence for Responsible Gambling, and then the more difficult subject of FATF grey listing and how that relates to the gambling sector. Before I go any further, I would just like to thank my great team who are sitting here for their continued work and support. By August, that's August 2022, it's a bit of an in-joke, they will be in a new office to accommodate a marginally expanded but properly resourced team. We have a great deal of work ahead in terms of bringing in the new licensing regime, modernising and digitalising the systems, and bringing much more of our due diligence process in-house. Public servants often get a bad rap in Gibraltar, but I have a small team that really does some heavy lifting. They are loyal and hard-working, committed to change, and they deliver significant value for money. They also bring organisation to the chaos I create and upwards manage me, understanding that my bandwidth is often over limit and occasionally my wires fall out. They know my weaknesses, and I have great professional pride in seeing them question policy, work independently, and often suggest better solutions than the ones I come up with. Having great people around makes my job easier and very rewarding. We are now in a consultation period. There is no gambling law teaching today you'll be grateful for, but I wanted to outline the consultation framework. I am available all day to take individual questions on that. The command paper, which is the bill and an explanatory note, are on the government law website and also on our own. The Minister and I have been engaged in operator meetings on a one-to-one basis, and the initial feedback that we have had suggests that the new legislation is welcome and causes few difficulties for our licensees. We are arranging consultations through the GBGA, and we'll do that in a structured way. But we're also happy to have bespoke meetings with any other stakeholder. By the middle of July, I'm going to put out a further document for consultation that will articulate proposals for a licensing framework and fee structure. That is not about securing additional fees from our sector overall, but there will be some tweaks and the introduction of a personal licensing regime for key personnel. I expect the fee for the 5-year license to be somewhere in the region of £300 to £500. The Act is founded on flexible substance, and the licensing objectives include maintaining confidence in markets, protecting the reputation of Gibraltar, as well as protecting minors, problem gamblers, and consumers in general. It is a modern, flexible act for a new era, which, despite the bumps in the road, I expect to secure growth for the sector. It is a genuine consultation with the policy objective of Gibraltar remaining an established gambling hub, but also attracting new business in a changing gambling landscape, which includes multi-jurisdictional location. We will listen to all of your views and we will flex where necessary. Next to the Centre of Excellence for Responsible Gambling, the CERG is up and running at the university. It is already doing great work and establishing a reputation in the international research community and has hosted key conferences in Gibraltar. I'd like to take a moment to emphasise the importance of participating in the needs assessment study being conducted by the Centre. You may be surprised to find that this is the first assessment of this industry's responsible gambling needs for education and training, research and services to support your employees and your customers. The 25-minute online questionnaire and 30-minute follow-up interviews may seem like a big ask in your busy schedules, but the results will provide a roadmap for the CERG, the local industry, and stakeholders in other jurisdictions. The CERG has invited responses from leaders in responsible gambling from companies licensed in Gibraltar and sent a link to the questionnaire. Many companies have already completed the questionnaire and scheduled their interviews, which is highly appreciated. Those who haven't yet, please do so. If you have not yet provided a contact, there are people from the CERG, Zolt, Andy and Judith here today who will be able to help you with that. And there is also an email address which is cerg@unigib.edu.gi. The industry here should be fully engaged with the CERG, and I would go as far as to say that you should be looking at how in the future you can support that organisation from the generous budgets you are setting aside for your social responsibility foundations and your developing ESG programmes. Make sure that your company's voice is heard. I now want to turn to the issue of Moneyval and FATF. I want to make it clear that the remarks I'm about to make on FATF grey listing are my personal views and not those of the Government of Gibraltar. Nevertheless, I make those views known in my capacity as a statutory appointee as Gambling Commissioner and with an insider's view of the Moneyval and FATF process. I am highly committed to gaining a positive result from the jurisdiction in terms of getting Gibraltar off the grey list in the fastest possible time. And I welcome this opportunity today, so close to the decision, to provide you, as much as I can, bound by the mutual and confidential nature of the process, about the facts in issue. To be clear, there are only two action points to address. One relates to successful confiscation cases, and that is really an issue for the police and the law officers. And secondly, supervisors imposing proportionate and effective sanctions where appropriate. The FATF plenary decision to put Gibraltar on a list of countries subject to enhanced monitoring has brought into question the efficacy of gambling supervision in this jurisdiction in respect of one issue only, the imposition of a range of appropriate sanctions. Had the FATF accepted the range of sanctions imposed by the Gambling Division in the post-observation period was effective, proportionate and dissuasive, then all other issues considered, and applying the principle of proportionality, it may be that Gibraltar would not have been placed on the grey list at all. That is my perception. Now we are exhorted to move actively and successfully to impose sanctions where appropriate. Lurid and potentially skewed media headlines often leverage a particular handle, in this case the FATF press briefing, but they rarely provide an exposition of the facts, which is what I propose to do here. I would be as bold as to say that there are no fundamental systemic AML-TF weaknesses in this jurisdiction, and Gibraltar now has a strong AML and TF system, which makes the grey listing decision more difficult to cope with. This is the shortest action plan for any grey-listed jurisdiction, and a different outcome may have been to return Gibraltar to the Moneyval enhanced monitoring, as happened with the Isle of Man. This alternative was not adopted. Nevertheless, Gibraltar strived to be admitted to the Moneyval FATF process and must stay committed to the process. Therefore, I will only deal in the facts. Before the Moneyval inspection in 2019, the Gambling Division was already transitioning to a more structured site visit programme. Since the report, we have established a transparent risk assessment process, a structured site visit programme, revised our guidance on AML and TF, and committed to professional development in this area. Internally, we are not seen as a weak point in the supervisory structure. What is clear is that the recommendations made by the first Moneyval Mutual Evaluation Report in respect of having more structure in our supervisory regime were very useful, and we fully embrace them. In the recent round of operator evaluations, we have conducted extensive site visits to 100% of B2C operators, finding only one below the line, and that is being addressed by the firm's senior management. Our constituency is small, but most gambling regulators would struggle to have assessed all of their relevant licensees because of the size of the task in dealing with their larger regulated communities. Where we have identified issues for improvement, we have flagged these in operator communications, and I am struggling to think of an incident where we have avoided putting a case over the enforcement threshold. We have formally recorded site visit letters and internal detail from each site visit. In the relevant evaluation period, 2020 to 2022, we have reached 6 regulatory settlements with 5 operators, including financial elements totaling £3.7 million. This is 1/3 of our total B2C population that has been sanctioned. Financial settlements have been accompanied by other requirements such as third-party or internal audit reports and requirements for senior management consideration, including victim compensation. 5 of those settlements were subject to public statements. What we are struggling to rationalise is that in setting out to achieve the action point that was set for us relating to sanctions, the 6 cases in a post-observation period were not considered to be positive and tangible progress, in particular as there was no criteria provided as to what would have been deemed sufficient. There has been no criticism of the quantum of the sanctions, so we must assume that the issue is frequency, range, consistency, and/or proportionality in the context of the FATF's perception of risk of the sector. The system of evaluation allows for structured, subjective evaluation of effectiveness. And as the FATF is an international governmental body without legal form, there are no grounds for judicial or quasi-judicial appeal, if that was even contemplated, which it is not being. For the avoidance of doubt, none of these sanctions were imposed because of the Moneyval pressure. They were imposed for good reason, because the circumstances and regulatory shortcomings had reached the enforcement threshold. The enforcement cases were driven out of a more structured approach and our close relationship with the FIU. I also firmly believe that the imposition of these sanctions has raised standards. We have seen this on subsequent site visits, in particular to those operators who were subject of regulatory settlements. This adds a certain degree of difficulty as enforcement cases may be more frequent due to the dissuasive effect. We presented this evidence to the FATF during the evaluation process and believed we had dealt with any reservations. At various stages, we felt we had countered concerns about this single issue relating to sanctions and the proportionality of those sanctions against gambling firms, not least because we were the most active supervisor on sanctions domestically. However, this decision has been taken and we must abide by the determination. What is clear is that we have, as both a jurisdiction with a significant gambling sector and as a financial centre, been held to a standard that is exacting. Any offshore jurisdiction going into the Moneyval FATF process in the future must understand that this has been a significant and difficult learning experience for us all. Certainly we present zero risk to the UK, our biggest gambling market, as our UK-facing firms are dual regulated. EU business in terms of licensing is not conducted from Gibraltar, and rest of the world jurisdictions are protected by our developed regulatory regime, where their domestic digital gambling supervisory regimes are either underdeveloped or non-existent. As I have said, there is no question of a case that has not been identified for enforcement action that we did not pursue, and we have carried out AML CFT assessments on the entirety of the established B2C regulated sector. Where do we go from here? The required action talks about imposing sanctions where appropriate. Those final words are important. We have to prove out that our regime is robust, something that we must accept that we did not manage to achieve in the current round. We must assault the summit again. In order to achieve this, it will be necessary to continue our supervisory programme, as well as to bring forward some on-site visits which may have been anticipated until at a later date. They will be thorough and exacting. We will prove out again that 100% of our regulated community deal with the risk satisfactorily, or if they have gone backwards, we will deal with that through the enforcement route, where this is appropriate. What we will not do is artificially adapt our standards to accommodate enforcement cases. That is not the Gibraltar way. I do not believe for one moment that the FATF are asking us to do that, and they are not critical of our risk assessment process and standards per se. Operators will need to be tolerant in the next few months with our regulatory interventions and calls on their time. We may also need to call for more data and to conduct effectiveness surveys. I do not see the objective as imposing more sanctions per se, but proving out the overall effectiveness of our regime and imposing sanctions where necessary and in a proportionate manner. Even after our difficult experience, I believe that the work of the FATF and its regional bodies is a force for good, and that people that work within it are well-meaning. Overall standards have been raised due to our engagement with their processes. There is no getting away from the fact that we are left with a sense of injustice on the sanctions issue, as we thought we had presented a strong case on effectiveness and proportionality within our industry under our broadly endorsed risk framework. We must just get over this, otherwise we will not be in shape to drive a positive outcome. I am reminded the measure of leadership is how one inspires and motivates in difficult times, not being dragged down by the doomsayers and those who would seek to take advantage of this situation. You may be left at the end of this address thinking there are unexplained anomalies or something left unsaid. In terms of the facts, there is not. We cannot disclose the private exchanges between the jurisdiction and the FATF on how they should treat and particularly weight the evidence presented to them. We can only respect the outcome and find reference points to determine what is required. The best reference points are the outstanding action points that we've been left with, which apply to all supervisors and as well as the views expressed at the press conference. When you heard the content of the press conference, we were also hearing it for the first time. There will be those who question whether the government or its agents in this process could have done better or presented the case better. All I can say is that because of the professionalism of the core team that has worked tirelessly on the Moneyval FAT issues, Gibraltar is far from bearing the hallmarks of an archetypal grey list jurisdiction. For the way it has massively improved its AML and TF systems in a difficult period for all jurisdictions, I am sure we will be off the grey list in 12 months at the re-evaluation stage. I am determined to see a successful outcome in this area over the line, but in a fair and balanced way. This is a mutual evaluation process, and we would expect the FATF to be equally supportive of Gibraltar as we are of it in difficult and challenging circumstances. Thank you.